The champagne tasted like ashes in Evelyn's mouth. For 9 years, she had meticulously built a fortress around her heart, brick by painful brick. Her son, Leo, was the sunshine in its courtyard, the only light she needed. She thought the past was buried, a ghost that couldn't touch her. But then she saw him. Standing across the manicured lawn of the lakeside wedding, looking unfairly handsome in a tailored suit, was Robert, her ex-husband, the man who had shattered her world. Before she could grab Leo and run, her son's small voice cut through the air. The late September sun cast a golden glow over Lake Geneva, making the water glitter as if strewn with diamonds. White roses and eucalyptus draped every surface of the elegant pavilion, their scent mixing with the sweet perfume of tiered cake and expensive champagne. It was the kind of fairy tale wedding Evelyn once dreamed of for herself a lifetime ago. Now, watching her college friend Chloe laugh breathlessly as her new husband spun her on the dance floor, Evelyn felt a quiet, contented joy. She smoothed the back of her navy blue silk dress, her gaze finding her own treasure, her son, Leo, who was meticulously arranging sugar packets into a fortress on their linen-covered table. At 8 years old, Leo was her entire world, a perfect blend of her own thoughtful eyes and a sharp, inquisitive mind that was all his own. He had a dimple in his left cheek that appeared only when he was deeply focused, and it was on full display now. 9 years. It had been 9 years of just the two of them, a journey that had started in the rubble of a broken marriage and led them here, to this peaceful, stable life she had clawed and fought to build. She was a respected graphic designer at a firm in Chicago, owned her own cozy condo, and had a circle of friends who were more like family. They were happy. They were safe. A server offered her another glass of champagne, and she accepted with a grateful smile. The bubbles fizzed on her tongue, a taste of celebration. She felt a rare, unburdened lightness in her chest. For the first time in years, the past felt truly distant, like a story that had happened to someone else. That was when she saw him. He was standing near the edge of the terrace, framed by a cascade of white hydrangeas, talking to the groom's father. The setting sun caught the silver at his temples, a distinguished touch he hadn't had a decade ago. But the confident set of his shoulders, the easy way he held his glass, the precise cut of his dark grey suit, that was all Robert. Her Robert. No, not hers. Never really hers, as it turned out. The champagne glass grew heavy in her hand. The air, once filled with music and laughter, suddenly felt thin, hard to draw into her lungs. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, snaked its way up her spine. It couldn't be. Chloe knew her history. She would have warned her. But then she remembered Chloe mentioning her husband, Ben, had a cousin from an estranged side of the family he'd recently reconnected with, a cousin from New York. Of course, the world was both vast and cruelly, claustrophobically small. Her first instinct was primal: flee. Grab Leo, make a polite but swift exit, and drive back to the city before he could see them. Before that carefully constructed peace could be shattered. She placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, ready to whisper that it was time to go. But her body wouldn't obey. She was frozen, a statue of a wedding guest, her gaze locked on the man who was once the center of her universe. He laughed at something the other man said, a deep, resonant sound that the wind carried across the lawn directly to her ears. It was a sound that had once meant home, safety, and love. Now it was a siren's call, warning of treacherous rocks. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. For a horrifying second, she thought their eyes would meet. She ducked her head, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stared intently at the sugar packet fort, pretending to be utterly captivated by it. "Mom, are you okay? Your face is all pale." Leo's voice, full of innocent concern, broke through her panic. She forced a smile, the muscles in her face feeling stiff and foreign. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just a little tired. It's been a long day." "Can I have another piece of cake? The chocolate one?" he asked, his attention already diverted. "Of course, honey, go ahead." As he scampered off toward the dessert table, she risked another glance. Robert was alone now, looking out over the lake. His posture seemed less confident than it had moments before. There was a solitude about him, a pensiveness that she didn't recognize. In the 9 years since she'd last seen him, in a sterile courtroom, their lawyers flanking them like seconds in a duel, he seemed to have acquired a new weight. Not a physical weight, but something heavier, something carried in the slight slump of his shoulders. Good, she thought, a bitter, surprising venom rising in her. I hope it's heavy. I hope it's guilt. She tracked Leo's progress, a little satellite of a mother, watching as he secured his prize and started back toward her. He took a wide route, navigating around a group of dancing couples. His path was taking him closer to the terrace, closer to Robert. "No, no, no," Evelyn whispered under her breath, a useless mantra. Robert turned from the lake, his gaze still distant. And then it wasn't. It fell, as if by some cruel magnetic pull, directly onto the small boy with the shock of dark brown hair and the slice of chocolate cake held carefully in his hands. Evelyn saw Robert's body go rigid. The subtle shift was imperceptible to anyone else, but she knew it. She had spent 7 years studying the nuances of his every move. His polite social mask dissolved, replaced by a raw, unguarded expression of shock. And then something else. A yearning so profound it felt like a physical blow, even from 50 feet away. He knew, of course he knew, he was looking at a miniature, softer version of himself. Leo, oblivious, continued his journey, his eyes on his cake. He was about to walk right past him. Evelyn's legs finally unlocked. She stood, ready to intercept, to call Leo's name and pull him back into the safety of her orbit. But it was too late. Robert took a step forward, a hesitant, almost clumsy movement. Leo looked up, startled by the large shadow that had fallen over him. He saw a tall, well-dressed stranger looking down at him with an intensity that made him pause. Evelyn's breath hitched. This was it, the moment she had rehearsed and dreaded in countless sleepless nights. Then, from across the lawn, she saw Leo's face break into a curious, cautious smile. He tilted his head, then turned and looked back at her, his expression unreadable. He raised a small hand and pointed, not with accusation, but with simple, childish clarity. He took a few steps back toward her, his voice carrying clearly in a sudden lull in the music. "Mom!" he called out, his tone laced with confusion and a strange excitement. "That man is looking at me. He's crying." He paused, his brow furrowed, then added the words that made her world tilt on its axis. "He says he wants to hug me." The life Evelyn had shared with Robert felt like it belonged to a different woman, a younger, more naive creature who believed in the grand, sweeping promises of love. They had met in her final year at Northwestern, where she was studying art history, buried in books and scholarships. He was at the business school, a visiting guest lecturer for a semester, 10 years her senior, and radiating an aura of effortless power. He was a sterling. The Sterlings of New York were a dynasty built on old money and ruthless real estate ventures, a world as foreign to Evelyn, the daughter of a high school librarian and a mechanic from Joliet, as the surface of the moon. Robert hadn't just pursued her, he'd laid siege to her. He'd sent bouquets of rare flowers to her tiny dorm room, filled her voicemail with charming, witty messages, and whisked her away to dinners at restaurants where the water glasses cost more than her textbooks. He'd been fascinated by her quiet intensity, her passion for art, and what he called her still waters, a calmness he claimed balanced his own restless energy. She, in turn, had been utterly captivated. He was brilliant, ambitious, and made her feel like the only person in the room. He made her feel seen. His family, however, saw her as a curiosity at best, a liability at worst. His mother, Catherine Sterling, was a woman carved from glacial ice, whose polite inquiries about Evelyn's family and background felt like forensic examinations. His father, a gruff patriarch who commanded boardrooms with an iron will, had sized her up with a dismissive glance and returned his attention to his Wall Street Journal. They saw a working-class girl with no connections, no pedigree, and no strategic value. Robert had promised it didn't matter. "It's you I'm marrying, Evie, not them," he'd vowed, his hand over his heart. And she, blinded by love, had believed him. Their first few years of marriage in their sprawling Park Avenue apartment were a dizzying blur of happiness. Evelyn tried to acclimate to the world of charity galas, Hampton weekends, and unspoken social codes. She managed the household, hosted immaculate dinner parties, and tried to be the perfect sterling wife. Robert was her anchor, her passionate and devoted husband who, behind closed doors, still looked at her like she was a masterpiece he'd been lucky enough to discover. But the foundation of their marriage had a fault line she'd refused to see. The power imbalance was immense. Her life was entirely funded and dictated by his. When she'd wanted to take a part-time job at a small art gallery, Catherine had scoffed. "A sterling wife doesn't work, dear. She manages. There's the hospital board and the museum auxiliary if you're feeling bored." Robert, wanting to avoid a fight with his parents, had gently sided with them. "They just want what's best for us, Evie. My work is so demanding, I need you. We don't need the money." It wasn't about the money. It was about a piece of herself she felt slowly eroding. The first real crack appeared when his father's company faced a hostile takeover attempt. Robert became consumed, working 100-hour weeks, his phone permanently attached to his ear. He grew distant, irritable, and the easy intimacy they shared was replaced by a tense silence. She tried to support him, bringing him meals he wouldn't eat, offering comfort he wouldn't accept. She felt less like a wife and more like a high-end housekeeper. The betrayal, when it came, was not a sudden explosion but a slow, sickening poison. It started with whispers from the periphery of their social circle, pitying looks from other wives, and Robert's increasingly flimsy excuses for late nights. He'd sworn it was just work, that she was being paranoid. He'd used her trust as a weapon against her, making her feel needy and irrational. The power imbalance was never starker. He held all the information, all the control, while she was left to doubt her own sanity. The truth came out on a Tuesday afternoon. A plain manila envelope arrived by messenger with no return address. Inside were photographs. Robert laughing with a woman, a sleek blonde lawyer from the rival firm, the daughter of a prominent judge. They were at a discreet hotel bar, his hand on the small of her back. In another, they were kissing on a darkened street corner, a kiss of familiar, devastating passion. It wasn't just an affair. It was a strategic alliance, a merger of power and influence that his family would have wholeheartedly approved of. She was the project he'd taken on, and this other woman was the partner he needed. When she confronted him, he didn't even have the decency to lie. He just looked tired, defeated. "It's complicated, Evie," he'd said, running a hand through his hair. The words were a universe of insult. Complicated. No, it was brutally simple. He had made a choice. He had chosen his world over hers. The divorce was swift and clinical. His family's lawyers descended, offering a generous settlement in exchange for her silence and a quick, clean break. They wanted to erase the working-class girl from the Sterling family ledger. She fought for only one thing. By then, she knew she was pregnant. She hadn't told him yet, terrified his family would try to take the child, to raise it as a Sterling, sanitized of her influence. In a moment of what she could only describe as divine madness, she refused their money, all of it. She signed their papers, took her maiden name back, and walked out of the courtroom with nothing but the clothes on her back and the tiny secret life growing inside her. It was the most terrifying and liberating moment of her life. She moved to Chicago, where Chloe lived, found a tiny apartment, and started over. The first few years were a struggle, marked by sleepless nights with a colicky baby and freelance design work that barely paid the rent. But every time she looked at Leo's face, she knew she'd made the right choice. She had built this life, their life, on her own terms. It was a life of integrity, love, and hard-won independence. A life free of the suffocating weight of the sterling name. A life where she was in control, and for 9 years that fortress had held, until now, until a ghost from that other life had stepped into the light and looked at her son with his father's eyes. Time seemed to warp and stretch in the space between Leo's words and Evelyn's response. Across the lawn, Robert stood as if frozen in time, his hand half extended, his face a canvas of emotions she couldn't begin to decipher from this distance. Shock, regret, and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. The tears sheening his eyes were real. She could see the glint of moisture even in the fading light. Evelyn's own tears were hot and angry, threatening to spill over. How dare he? How dare he cry? His tears were a currency he had no right to spend, not after leaving her with a shattered heart and a future she had to piece together alone. Her feet finally moved, carrying her swiftly across the grass. Every step was a battle between her instinct to shield her son and the paralyzing fear of the confrontation to come. The murmur of the wedding guests faded into a dull roar, her focus narrowing to 2 points. The small boy looking up at her with wide, confused eyes, and the tall man who was the source of all her old pain. "Leo, honey, come here," she said, her voice strained but level. She reached them just as Robert was taking another hesitant step forward. She put herself between them, a human shield in a silk dress, placing a firm, protective hand on Leo's shoulder. She could feel the slight tremor in her own fingers. She finally looked up, meeting Robert's gaze for the first time in 9 years. Up close, the changes were more pronounced. The silver at his temples was more prominent, and fine lines etched the corners of his eyes. Those eyes, once a warm, vibrant blue, now seemed deeper, shadowed with a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. He looked older, yes, but also diminished. The easy, almost arrogant confidence that had been his trademark was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that was deeply unsettling. "Evelyn," he breathed, his voice raspy. It was the first time he'd said her name in nearly a decade, and it felt like a violation. "Robert," she replied, her tone clipped and cold. She refused to give him an inch. "I believe this is a private party." His gaze flickered down to Leo, who was peering around her legs, his curiosity overriding any fear. He looks just like my grandfather," Robert murmured, a statement of awe, not possession. "I didn't know. Evelyn, I swear, I didn't know." "Why would you?" she retorted, the words sharper than she intended. "You were busy with complicated things." The bitterness of that long-ago conversation was still fresh on her tongue. Pain flashed across his face, a direct hit. He deserved it. He deserved so much more. "I deserved that," he said quietly, his eyes finding hers again. "I deserve whatever you want to say to me, but please don't let my mistakes stand between him and me. Just for a moment." His plea was so stripped of his usual arrogance that it momentarily threw her off balance. This wasn't the Robert she knew. The Robert she knew would have asserted his rights, brought in lawyers, made demands. This man was asking. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low and tense. "I want to meet my son," he said, the words catching in his throat. He looked at Leo again, a look of such profound, gut-wrenching longing that Evelyn felt an unwelcome pang of something other than hatred. It was a messy, complicated pity. "He asked for a hug," she remembered Leo saying. The sheer audacity of it, to ask for the one thing he had no right to. "His name is Leo," she said, the words feeling like a concession. "Leo, this is Robert." She couldn't bring herself to say, "your father." The word felt like a lie, a title unearned. "Leo," ever observant, seemed to sense the immense unspoken history crackling in the air. He stepped forward slightly, out from behind the shield of her body. "Your eyes are wet," Leo said to Robert, a simple, factual observation. Robert let out a shaky, wet laugh. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. The movement was slow, careful, as if approaching a frightened deer. He was giving Leo the power, the choice to engage or retreat. It was a gesture of respect Evelyn never would have expected from him. "Yes, they are," Robert said, his voice thick. "Sometimes when you see something you've been missing for a very, very long time, your eyes get a little leaky." "Like my teddy bear when I lost him at the park?" Leo asked, his head tilted. "Exactly like that," Robert whispered, "only 1,000,000 times more important." He didn't touch him. He kept his hands on his own knees, a picture of restraint. "It's an honor to meet you, Leo." Evelyn watched the exchange, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. A war was raging inside her. The part of her that had nursed her wounds for 9 years wanted to scream at him, to drag Leo away and never look back. But another part, the mother, saw the undisguised wonder on her son's face. Leo had never had a father figure. He was surrounded by love, but there was a void, an unanswered question at the center of his identity. And here was an answer, in the flesh, looking at him as if he were a miracle. An unspoken truce seemed to settle over the small triangle they formed on the manicured lawn. The anger was still there, simmering just below the surface, but for now it was held in abeyance by the gravity of the moment. Robert's motives were still a mystery. Was this a genuine emotional reaction, or the first move in a calculated game to reclaim a piece of the sterling legacy? His hidden motives were a shadow that loomed over everything. "We should go," Evelyn said finally, the words feeling inadequate. "Leo needs to get to bed." Robert stood up slowly, his eyes still locked on Leo. "Of course," he said, his voice regaining a semblance of composure. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a slim, elegant wallet, extracting a business card. He held it out to her. "This has my personal cell number, not my office. If you would ever be willing, I'd like to talk. Not about us, about him." She stared at the card. Taking it felt like opening a door she had triple-bolted 9 years ago, but refusing it in front of Leo felt cruel. With stiff fingers, she took the small piece of cardstock. His name was embossed in simple dark blue letters. Robert Sterling. No frills, no titles. "I'll think about it," she said, a non-committal answer that was the most she could offer. She took Leo's hand, his small fingers wrapping trustingly around hers. "Say goodbye, Leo." Leo gave a small wave. "Bye, Robert." As they walked away, back toward the glowing pavilion and the noise of the party, Evelyn could feel Robert's eyes on her back. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. The truce was over. The battle had just begun. Back at their table, the half-eaten slice of chocolate cake looked like a relic from another era. Leo was uncharacteristically quiet, his brow furrowed in thought as he methodically destroyed the sugar packet fort he'd so carefully constructed. The encounter had unsettled him, Evelyn could tell. It had opened a box of questions he didn't yet know how to form. For her part, Evelyn felt as though she were moving through water, every action requiring immense effort. She could still feel the weight of Robert's gaze, a physical pressure on her skin. Chloe, the radiant bride, floated over to their table, her lace dress shimmering. "Evie, I've barely seen you all night. Is everything okay?" Her smile faltered as she took in Evelyn's tense posture. "We're fine," Evelyn lied, forcing a brittle smile. "It's a beautiful wedding, Chloe. Truly. I'm so glad you could come. Ben was so happy to finally meet you and Leo." She paused, then lowered her voice. "Listen, I am so sorry. I had no idea Ben's cousin was your Robert. He only mentioned a Robert Sterling from New York, and honestly, it didn't even click. Ben hasn't seen that side of the family in over 15 years. If I had known, I would have warned you. I feel awful." The sincerity in her friend's eyes was a small comfort. It's not your fault. It was bound to happen someday, I guess." Just then, a woman approached their table, her expression hesitant. She was tall and slender, with the same dark hair as Robert, though her features were softer, her eyes a gentle brown instead of his piercing blue. Evelyn recognized her instantly, Sarah, Robert's younger sister. Of all the Sterlings, Sarah had been the kindest, a quiet, artsy soul who had always seemed as much of an outsider in her own family as Evelyn had. "Evelyn?" Sarah asked softly. "I wasn't sure it was you. It's been so long." "Sarah, hello," Evelyn said, her guard immediately back up. Was this a coordinated attack? The Sterling siblings closing ranks? "I saw you talking to Robert," Sarah said, her gaze flicking nervously toward the terrace where her brother still stood, a solitary figure against the deepening twilight. I wanted to say something." She took a deep breath. "He's not the same person he was, Evelyn. What he did to you, it broke something in him too, not at first. For the first few years, he was exactly the man our parents wanted him to be. He married Alexandra, the lawyer. It was a miserable, hollow marriage that lasted less than 2 years. It was a business transaction from the start." Evelyn said nothing, her face an impassive mask. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want him humanized. Sarah pressed on as if needing to unburden herself. "After the divorce, he just collapsed. He walked away from my father's company, sold his apartment and traveled for a year. No one knew where he was. When he came back, he was different, quieter. He started his own small investment firm, one that focuses on ethical and sustainable projects. Nothing like my father's scorched earth approach. He spends his weekends volunteering, building houses. He's been in therapy for years." She leaned a little closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's spent the last 5 years looking for you. He hired private investigators, but you covered your tracks so well. He just wanted to know if you were okay, and if there had been a child. He said he had a feeling. He just needed to know." The information swirled in Evelyn's head, a confusing tempest of doubt and resentment. Could people really change that much? Or was this just a new, more sophisticated form of manipulation? A redemption narrative carefully crafted to get what he wanted. The thought of him searching for her was both terrifying and, to a small, treacherous part of her, strangely touching. He had looked for her. "Why are you telling me this?" Evelyn asked, her voice flat. "Because I saw his face when he looked at your son," Sarah said, her own eyes welling up. "And I know that look. It's regret, the kind that eats you alive. He knows he has no rights here. He told me that. But I also know my brother, and he will spend the rest of his life trying to earn a small piece of forgiveness, if you'll let him." Sarah gave a sad, small smile, squeezed Evelyn's arm gently, and walked away, leaving Evelyn reeling in her wake. She looked over at Robert again. He was watching Leo, his expression unreadable from this distance, a silhouette of a man shrouded in shadows and secrets. Was he the monster who had callously discarded her? Or was he the penitent man Sarah described? Or was he perhaps both? The layered tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Her black and white narrative, the one that had sustained her for 9 years, was beginning to fray at the edges, letting in confusing shades of grey. The power imbalance of their past was what she remembered, but Sarah's story hinted at a different kind of power, the power of regret, the power of a child to inspire change. "Mom!" Leo's voice broke through her reverie. "Who was that lady?" "That was an old friend," Evelyn managed to say. "Is Robert her brother?" he asked, his sharp mind connecting the dots of their shared features. "Yes, sweetie, he is." Leo nodded slowly, absorbing this new piece of information. He picked up a clean spoon and began tracing patterns in the condensation on a water glass. After a long moment, he looked up at her, his expression serious. "Why did you look so sad when you were talking to him?" he asked. "And so angry?" The directness of the question struck her heart. She had tried so hard to protect him from the complexities of adult pain, to keep his world simple and safe. But the ghost at the feast had found them, and now the questions were beginning. The long overdue, terrifying questions. The drive back to Chicago was a study in silence. The highway lights painted fleeting stripes across the car's interior, illuminating the tense set of Evelyn's jaw and the pensive expression on Leo's face. He was normally a chatterbox after any social event, recounting every funny moment, every interesting dessert. Tonight he was quiet, his gaze fixed on the blur of the world outside his window. Evelyn knew he was processing. His mind, like a fertile field, had been planted with a seed of profound new information, and she had no idea what would grow from it. She had tucked him into bed with his usual stories and cuddles, hoping the normalcy of their routine would soothe the disruption. But as she was about to turn off his bedside lamp, his small voice stopped her. "Mom, was Robert your husband?" The question was so direct, so devoid of accusation, that it took her breath away. She sat down on the edge of his bed, the superhero-themed comforter soft beneath her. "Yes, honey. A very long time ago he was." "So he's my dad?" The word hung in the air between them, heavy and fragile. Dad. A concept Leo only knew from his friends, from books and movies. A one-syllable word that encompassed a universe of meaning she had never been able to provide. She chose her words with surgical precision. Genetically, yes, he is your biological father. But a dad is a role, Leo. It's a job. It's about being there every day, helping with homework, fixing your bike, reading bedtime stories. That's a job I've been doing, and so have Grandpa and Uncle Ben and all our friends. He seemed to consider this. "So, he's my father, but not my dad." "That's a good way to put it," she said, relief washing over her. "Why did you stop being married?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. This was the question she had always dreaded, the one she had no simple answer for. How could she explain the intricate web of betrayal, the crushing weight of family expectations, the slow erosion of self-esteem? How could she tell her sweet, trusting son that the man who had given him half his DNA had broken his mother's heart in a way that had taken years to mend? "Sometimes, sweetie," she began, her voice softer than she expected, "two people love each other very much, but they find out they want very different things in life. They realize they can't make each other happy anymore, and so the kindest thing they can do is to live separately so they don't end up hurting each other with their sadness." It was a sanitized version, a pale shadow of the ugly truth, but it was the only version fit for an 8-year-old's ears. Leo was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the outline of a cartoon rocket on his blanket. "Is he a bad person?" The question was a punch to the gut. For 9 years, the answer in her mind had been a simple, unequivocal yes. He was the villain of her story, the architect of her pain. But after seeing him at the wedding, after hearing Sarah's words, the answer felt complicated. "No," she said, the words surprising her as much as it might surprise him. "I don't think he's a bad person. I think he was a person who made some very big, very hurtful mistakes. People aren't all good or all bad, Leo. Most of us are just a mix. We try our best, and sometimes our best isn't good enough." She was speaking to Leo, but she was also speaking to herself, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions warring within her. Her anger was a shield, a familiar and protective weight. To even consider letting it go felt like a betrayal of the woman who had survived the wreckage. But holding on to it, she was beginning to realize, might end up hurting the very person she was trying to protect. If Robert was going to be a question in Leo's life, she had to arm her son with more than just her own bitterness. "Does he want to be my dad now?" Leo asked, his voice small. There it was, the heart of the matter, the hope and fear wrapped up in a single, vulnerable question. "I don't know, sweetie," she answered honestly. "I don't know what he wants. We haven't spoken in a very, very long time." She tucked the covers more snugly around him, her hand lingering on his forehead. His skin was warm, his breathing steady. He was so real, so solid, the beautiful, undeniable product of a love that had once been just as real. "Okay," he said, his eyes drooping with sleep. The interrogation was over for now. As she watched him drift off, Evelyn felt the walls of her fortress trembling. Leo's innocent inquiries were acting like a wrecking ball, forcing her to look at the rubble of her past, not as a monument to her pain, but as a foundation that needed re-examining. For 9 years she had been the sole narrator of their story. She had defined Robert, defined their history, and defined their future. Now, a new character had walked onto the stage, and her son was demanding a rewrite. She had to decide what her role would be. Would she be the gatekeeper, barring the door to the past? Or could she be a guide, helping her son navigate the complicated, messy truth in a way that wouldn't destroy him? The choice, she was realizing with a heavy heart, was no longer just about her own pain. It was about Leo's future. It was about his right to his own story, even the chapters she wished had never been written. For 3 days, Robert's business card sat on Evelyn's kitchen counter, a small rectangle of white cardstock that held the explosive potential of a landmine. She moved it from beside the fruit bowl to a magnetic clip on the fridge, then tucked it inside a cookbook, as if hiding it could diminish its power. Each time she saw it, her stomach twisted into a familiar knot of anxiety and resentment. To call him felt like a surrender. Not calling him felt like cowardice. Her life continued its normal rhythm. She met her deadlines at work, helped Leo build a sprawling Lego city in their living room, and had dinner with Chloe, where she recounted the conversation with Leo in painstaking detail. "You handled that beautifully," Chloe had assured her, squeezing her hand across the table at their favorite Italian restaurant. "You were honest without being brutal. That's all you can do." "But what do I do now?" Evelyn had asked, swirling the red wine in her glass. "Do I call him? Do I just ignore it and hope he goes away?" "Evie, look at me," Chloe said, her expression serious. "The Robert you've described from the wedding, the one Sarah vouched for, he's not going to just go away. He's seen his son. The game has changed. The question isn't if you're going to deal with him, it's how. You're in the driver's seat for the first time in your history with him. You get to set the terms." Chloe was right. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. In their past life, he and his family held all the cards, the money, the influence, the social standing. Now she held the one thing that mattered, the one thing his money couldn't buy: access to his son. It was a heady, terrifying realization. On the 4th day, an email arrived. The subject line was simple: "Following up." The sender was Robert Sterling. Her breath caught in her throat. The email was brief, formal, and meticulously worded. It was a masterclass in non-threatening communication, which ironically put her on high alert. "Dear Evelyn, I hope this email finds you well. I wanted to thank you for the grace you showed me at Chloe and Ben's wedding. It meant more than I can say. I am writing to formally request an opportunity to speak with you at your convenience. My hope is to discuss Leo. I want to understand what role, if any, you might be comfortable with me having in his life. I want to be clear. I am not seeking to disrupt the wonderful life you have built for him. I will be guided entirely by your wishes and what is ultimately best for him. I have no intention of pursuing this through legal channels. This is not a demand, it is a request. I am prepared to provide for him financially in any way you see fit, including a trust for his education and future, but my primary hope is more personal. If you are open to it, I would be happy to meet you at a time and public place of your choosing. Please let me know. Sincerely, Robert. Evelyn read the email 3 times. It was a calculated document. Every sentence seemed designed to preemptively dismantle her defenses. He acknowledged her grace, stated his purpose clearly, ceded all control to her, disavowed legal action, and offered financial support without making it the central issue. It was a far cry from the arrogant, entitled man who had once told her his family's wishes were paramount. And yet it still felt like a power move. The formality of it, the carefully constructed phrases, it was the work of a man used to strategic negotiations. This wasn't just a father reaching out, it was a Sterling making a calculated play. His hidden motive, she suspected, was still control. He was simply using a different, more sophisticated tactic. Instead of overpowering her, he was trying to outmaneuver her with reasonableness. She spent the entire day vacillating. Her heart screamed, "No!" He lost his chance. Her head, however, kept replaying Leo's question. Does he want to be my dad now? Ignoring this email meant she would have to lie to her son or tell him the man he just met didn't want to know him. Neither option felt right. That evening, she sat down at her laptop, Robert's email glowing on the screen. She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Chloe's words echoed in her mind. "You get to set the terms." She began to type. "Robert, I am willing to meet with you to discuss Leo, not us, only Leo. There will be conditions. All communication regarding Leo will be between you and me directly. Your parents are to have no involvement. This is not a negotiation about custody or legal rights, as you have no legal standing. Finally, any financial arrangements are a separate conversation, to be had at a much later date, if at all. Leo has never wanted for anything. I can be at the cafe in the Art Institute of Chicago this Saturday at 10 a.m. If that works for you, I will see you there. Evelyn." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The reply came in less than 5 minutes. "Saturday at 10 a.m. is perfect. Thank you, Evelyn. I will be there." The die was cast. She was walking into a meeting she had spent 9 years avoiding. But she wasn't the same woman who had left that courtroom. She was a mother, a professional, a survivor. He might be a Sterling, but she was Leo's mom. And in this arena, that was the only title that mattered. The Garden Cafe at the Art Institute was Evelyn's sanctuary. Tucked away in the museum's interior courtyard, the sound of the central fountain usually soothed her nerves. On this Saturday morning, however, it sounded like a roaring in her ears. She had chosen the location deliberately. It was public, yet offered pockets of privacy. It was her territory, a place filled with the art that had been her first love, long before Robert. It was a reminder of who she was before him and who she had become after him. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a small, secluded table under the shade of a locust tree. He stood up as she approached, his movements stiff and formal. He looked tired, dressed in simple grey trousers and a navy polo shirt, a deliberate dressing down she suspected to appear less intimidating. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat down. "I'm here for Leo," she stated, forgoing any pleasantries. She placed her purse on the empty chair beside her, a small barrier. A server came and they ordered coffee, the mundane ritual a stark contrast to the monumental weight of their conversation. When the server left, a tense silence descended. Robert broke it. "He's incredible, Evelyn. You've done an amazing job with him. He's bright, polite, curious. He's everything." The praise was genuine, but it felt like a tactic, an opening gambit. "He is," she agreed coolly. "Now you wanted to talk. What role exactly do you envision for yourself?" He seemed taken aback by her directness. He took a slow sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I don't know," he admitted, and the honesty of it surprised her. "I don't have the right to envision anything. I forfeited that. I guess I'd like to start by just being known to him. I want him to know who I am. I'd like to see him occasionally, take him to a museum, a baseball game, be a small, consistent presence in his life if you'll allow it. And I want to provide for his future." "His future is secure," she cut in. "I've seen to that." "I know you have," he said quickly. "This isn't about suggesting you haven't. It's about my responsibility. A responsibility I abdicated 9 years ago. I can't go back and fix that, but I can damn well try to fulfill it now." Her anger, which had been simmering just below the surface, began to boil over. "Responsibility? You want to talk about responsibility? Where was your responsibility when you were lying to me for months? Where was it when you let your parents treat me like I was something you'd scraped off your shoe? Where was it when you let me walk away with nothing, not even knowing I was carrying your child? The words poured out of her, a torrent of pain held back for nearly a decade. The other cafe patrons glanced over, and she lowered her voice, but the venom remained. Robert didn't flinch. He took it, his face pale, his knuckles white where he gripped his coffee cup. "You're right," he said when she finished, his voice low and ragged. "You're right about all of it. There is no excuse for what I did, only an explanation, and you deserve that at least." She braced herself for a litany of justifications, of blame-shifting. But what came next was not what she expected. "I was a coward," he said, looking her directly in the eye. The vulnerability she'd seen at the wedding was back, raw and unfiltered. "I grew up in a world where love was conditional. It was about mergers, alliances, and strengthening the family name. My father ruled our lives like a dictator. When I met you, it was the first time I'd ever felt anything that was truly my own. You were real and genuine, and everything my world wasn't, and I loved you for it. But I wasn't strong enough to protect you or us from my family." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The affair with Alexandra, it wasn't about passion. It was about surrender. My father was threatening to disinherit me. His company was under attack, and her father was a key ally he needed. He presented it to me as my duty. He said my marriage to you was a youthful indulgence I needed to outgrow. He told me to end it, or he would. He would have made your life a living hell, Evelyn. He would have used his money and power to crush you." "So you did it for him," she finished, the words tasting like acid. "No," he said, shaking his head vehemently. "That's the lie I told myself. I did it for me. I was weak. I was terrified of losing the money, the status, the only life I'd ever known. I was a 35-year-old man who was still afraid of his father. I chose the cage I knew over the freedom you offered, because I was too much of a coward to build a new life. I threw away the only real thing I ever had for a pile of money, and the approval of a man I don't even like, let alone respect." He slumped back in his chair, the confession seeming to drain the very life from him. "I didn't know you were pregnant. If I had known, I swear everything would have been different." "Would it?" she challenged, her voice skeptical. "Or would your father have tried to take him from me?" "Yes," he admitted, his honesty brutal. "He would have. And that's the fight I should have fought. I should have stood up to him and protected you both. And I didn't. That failure has haunted me every single day for 9 years. After my marriage to Alexandra imploded, after I saw what a hollow sham my life had become, I finally understood what I had lost. It wasn't just a wife. It was my integrity, my soul." The air crackled with the weight of his words. This wasn't a maneuver. It was a confession, raw and self-incriminating. It didn't excuse his actions, but it reframed them. He wasn't a cold, calculating monster. He was a weak man who had made a catastrophic choice, a choice he was still paying for. For the first time, a tiny fissure appeared in the wall of Evelyn's anger. Through it, she saw not the man who had destroyed her life, but a man who had destroyed his own. The moral complexity of it was dizzying. He was not a villain to be vanquished, but a deeply flawed human being drowning in a sea of his own making. A slow emotional shift began inside her, subtle as a change in the tide. The burning hatred that had fueled her for so long cooled slightly, leaving behind the dull, heavy ache of a shared tragedy. 2 lives, and now a third, irrevocably shaped by one man's weakness. "What happens now?" she asked, the question no longer an accusation but a genuine inquiry. "That," he said, his gaze filled with a desperate, fragile hope, "is entirely up to you." The first meeting was on a crisp, sunny Saturday a week later, at the Lincoln Park Zoo. Evelyn had chosen the location for its wide open spaces, its crowds of anonymous families, and its easy escape routes. She laid down the rules to Robert over the phone in a voice that brooked no argument. We'll be there from 1 to 3. You and I will remain together. You can talk to Leo, walk with him, but this is a supervised visit. We are not playing happy families. This is an introduction, nothing more." Robert had agreed to everything without hesitation. "Whatever you say, Evelyn. Thank you for the chance." She dressed Leo in his favorite bright orange hoodie, making him easy to spot. As they waited by the sea lion enclosure, watching the sleek animals bark and dive, Evelyn's nerves were stretched taut. She felt like a parole officer overseeing a delicate reunion, hyper-aware of every possible thing that could go wrong. Leo, however, was a bundle of nervous excitement. "Is Robert going to know a lot about animals?" he'd asked on the drive over. "I'm not sure, sweetie. You can ask him," she'd replied, her own heart thumping. Robert arrived precisely at 1 o'clock. He was wearing jeans and a simple grey sweater, looking more like a suburban dad than a New York tycoon. He was holding a small, discreetly wrapped gift bag. "Hi," he said, his eyes finding Leo first. He offered a small, tentative smile. "Hi, Robert," Leo replied, half hiding behind Evelyn's leg. "I brought you something," Robert said, crouching down to Leo's level as he had at the wedding. He held out the bag. "It's just a book I thought you might like. It's about constellations." Evelyn watched, ready to intervene if the gift was too extravagant, too much of a bribe. But a book was safe, thoughtful even. Leo took the bag, his shyness warring with his curiosity. He peeked inside, and his eyes lit up. "I love space." "I remembered," Robert said softly. A ghost of a memory, perhaps. Evelyn vaguely recalled telling him once, years ago, how she'd loved astronomy as a child. Had he filed that tiny detail away and applied it to a son he didn't know he had? The thought was strangely unsettling. The first half hour was painfully awkward. The three of them walked from the primate house to the reptile building, a strange, disconnected unit. The conversation was stilted, filtered through Evelyn. Leo would point something out, Evelyn would comment, and Robert would add a careful, measured observation, always directing his words to Leo but his gaze flickering to Evelyn for approval. He was a model of restraint. He never crowded Leo, never pushed for a reaction, never tried to force a connection. He simply existed in their space, a quiet, observant presence. He was letting Leo lead, and slowly Leo's natural curiosity began to win out over his apprehension. At the polar bear exhibit, as they watched the massive white creature pace behind the glass, Leo turned to Robert directly for the first time. "Do you have any kids?" Leo asked, his 8-year-old mind not yet grasping the full picture. Evelyn tensed, but Robert answered smoothly, his voice gentle. "I do," he said, his eyes meeting Leo's. "I have one son, and I am very, very happy to be meeting him today." Leo's brow furrowed, processing this. "Me?" he whispered. "You," Robert confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't elaborate. He didn't say, "I'm your father." He just answered the question, letting the single word fill the space between them. Evelyn saw a flicker of understanding dawn in Leo's eyes, followed by a wave of shyness so profound he immediately turned and buried his face in her coat. Her heart ached for him, for the sheer weight of this day. Robert took a step back, giving them space. His face was a mask of pain and patience. He was watching his son, a boy he longed to embrace, hide from the very idea of him. This, Evelyn realized, was his penance. Not in grand gestures or financial offerings, but in these small, agonizing moments of earned trust. His redemption wasn't going to be a dramatic event. It was going to be a slow, painstaking process of showing up, being patient, and respecting the boundaries she had set. As they were leaving, walking toward the exit, Leo stumbled on an uneven piece of pavement. He went down, not hard, but enough to scrape his knee. Before Evelyn could even react, Robert was there, dropping to one knee beside him. "Whoa, buddy, you okay?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. Leo's eyes filled with tears, more from surprise than pain. Robert instinctively reached out to help him up, but then his hand froze in mid-air. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes asking for permission. It was a crucial, infinitesimal moment. A test. He had deferred to her authority as a parent. In that small, reflexive gesture, he had shown her more respect than he ever had in the last year of their marriage. Evelyn gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Robert's hand gently closed around Leo's arm, helping him to his feet. "Let's have a look," he said softly, examining the small scrape. "You're tough. That's just a little battle scar." Leo, soothed by the calm attention, sniffled and nodded. The moment passed. But for Evelyn, it was a turning point. It was the first concrete piece of evidence that the man Sarah had described, the man who had confessed his weakness in the cafe, might actually be real. This wasn't just about his words anymore. It was about his actions. The first step toward redemption wasn't a giant leap. It was a frozen hand, a questioning glance, and a quiet respect for the woman he had wronged. It was small, fragile, and almost invisible, but it was a start. The transition from autumn to the biting winds of a Chicago winter mirrored the slow, cautious shift in Evelyn's life. The weekly visits to the zoo gave way to afternoons at the Museum of Science and Industry, and then, as a fragile trust began to form, to Robert picking Leo up for a few hours on his own. Each step was a negotiation, each new level of access granted by Evelyn only after Robert had proven himself reliable, respectful, and wholly consistent. He never overstepped. He called when he said he would call. He brought Leo back precisely when he said he would. He sent Evelyn a brief, factual text after each visit, summarizing what they had done. "We saw the submarine and got ice cream. He had a great time." There were no emotional pleas, no attempts to manipulate her through their son. He was meticulously following the script she had written, and in doing so was slowly earning a new role. He was not Dad. To Leo, he remained Robert, but the name was now said with an easy familiarity, not confusion. He was the man who knew all the best facts about dinosaurs, who could patiently explain how a circuit board worked, and who listened, truly listened, to Leo's rambling stories about his friends and his Lego creations. He was becoming a fixture in Leo's life, a welcome and stable one. Evelyn found herself in a new, uncharted territory. The all-consuming anger that had been her constant companion for 9 years had receded. In its place was a quiet, watchful peace, tinged with the melancholy of what could have been. Seeing Robert with Leo was a constant, painful reminder of the years he had missed, the family they had failed to be. But it was also, surprisingly, a source of a different kind of joy. Seeing her son's face light up as he talked about his weekend adventure was a gift, even if the giver was the man who had caused her so much pain. The power imbalance that had defined their marriage was now completely inverted. She was the gatekeeper, the architect of this new dynamic. Robert's immense wealth, which had once been a tool of control over her, was now channeled solely into a trust for Leo's future, managed by an independent third party. He had insisted, and she had, after much consideration, agreed. It wasn't for her, it was for her son. She continued to live her life with the fierce independence she had earned. Her condo, her job, her friendships, they were all hers, untouched by sterling money. One cold February afternoon, Robert dropped Leo off after they'd spent the day at the aquarium. Leo was buzzing with excitement, clutching a stuffed penguin and chattering about sharks. "Thank you for today," Evelyn said to Robert at the door, their interactions now settled into a polite, if still distant, rhythm. "It's my pleasure," he said. He looked at her, a rare moment of direct, unguarded contact. "Evelyn, for what it's worth, I know sorry is a useless word, but I want you to know that seeing what you've done, the life you've built, the person Leo is, I'm in awe of you. I threw away a masterpiece and you took the shattered pieces and built something even more beautiful on your own. I just wanted you to know that I see it. I see you." His words were not a plea for reconciliation, but a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of her strength. It was the validation she had never known she needed, a simple, profound recognition of her journey. She just nodded, unable to find the words. He gave a small, sad smile and left. Later that night, as she was tucking Leo into bed, he looked up at her from under his covers, the stuffed penguin nestled beside him. "Mom," he said sleepily, "I'm glad I met Robert." "I am too, sweetie," she whispered, and was startled to find that she meant it. She wasn't in love with Robert. That part of her history was firmly in the past, a closed book on a dusty shelf. There would be no fairy tale reunion, no rekindling of a long-lost flame. Their story was not one of romance redeemed, but of something far more complex and perhaps more meaningful. It was a story of forgiveness, not the loud, dramatic kind, but a quiet, internal acceptance. It was about allowing a flawed, repentant man a chance to be the father he should have been for the sake of a child who deserved to be loved by both his parents. Her redemption was not in finding love again with him, but in finding peace within herself. She was no longer Evelyn Sterling, the wronged wife. She wasn't even just Evelyn, the survivor. She was Evelyn, a woman whole and strong, defined not by the betrayal that had once shattered her, but by the quiet grace with which she had rebuilt her world. As the snow fell softly outside her window, blanketing the city in a clean white slate, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. It was not a fiery, passionate dawn, but a quiet, gentle one, and it was all her own. Evelyn's journey from betrayal to a hard-won peace shows that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the greatest strength. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about rewriting the future, not for an old love, but for a new generation. Her story reminds us that forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation, but about taking back your own power and finding peace on your own terms. What did you think of Evelyn's decision? Could you have done the same? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and the incredible resilience of the human heart.